So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and today we've got another custom scenario from Eclipse 2500 of the Dark Tide. I think the last one he's going to be doing for the time being because he's going back to work, but hopefully the production will continue apace at a later date. I'm going to refer to this as FORNOST because this is a battle that involves Arthedain and a settlement that is being attacked by the Angmar. And I think this probably suits FORNOST the most. I know that FORNOST does have a custom settlement that they use in DAC, but doesn't really work too well for multiplayer, that one, so I can understand why it wasn't ported across. And this has the look of a standard fortress from Medieval 2, which has been slightly altered in a couple of ways to make it fit into a custom map a little bit better. And we'll go through the rules of this scenario, because this isn't just a straight up battle either. Technically it is, and the rules are just being enforced by the starting positions of the armies. But, going to be interesting. You can see 4 Angmar armies going to be bearing down on FORNOST here, and 2 Arthedain armies are within, which are going to be defending the settlement. And they've lit the signal fires to signify that they are under attack, and the Dunedain that were outside of the settlement are going to have to get back to FORNOST very, very quickly to try and save it from the Angmar, because 2 armies will crumble in the face of 4. But with a bit of Dunedain support, who knows? You know, there are cavalry as well, so they will be able to get back to their positions relatively quickly with them. But of course, Angmar themselves have got plenty of tools for dealing with cavalry. So let's go through the attacking armies first of all, starting with Eclipse himself, playing as one of the Angmar attackers. The Warg Riders, who will be most useful, of course, for dealing with those Dunedain cavalrymen when they come back. They will be relatively easily skirmished down by any ranged cavalry that the Dunedain have brought to bear. But if they do get into melee with them, they'll do pretty well. But for the most part, of course, they're just going to be almost like ablative armour for the infantry in many ways. The Warg Skirmishers will have a slightly easier time of defending themselves, or at least a slightly easier time of doing damage, because they will more likely be able to get into a range where they can use their javelins than straight up melee. But still, they suffer the same weaknesses, of course, as the standard Warg Riders. Interesting to see how the Trolls get used, because they could be used to zone out cavalry, but that's a risky thing to do, considering the fact that if certain cavalry does manage to get a nice charge into the Trolls, a lot of them will end up being skewered. At the back end of his army, he has got some Blackwatch Legion, good for pushing through the narrower choke points within the settlement itself. It'll be interesting to see if that is indeed how they are used. Witch-Realm Blackguard, there was some speculation on whether these guys were human or orcs. I've always thought of them as being human, actually, because of their likeness to the Witch King, or at least their emulation of the Witch King in their armour, and he was a human at one point after all. But also just the fact that the Angmar, a lot of it was made up of evil men, actually, so the fact that it's such a heavily orc-focused faction means that any units where it's ambiguous, I just kind of assume that they're humans, to be honest with you. And someone said that they were the guard of Barad-dûr, when they are absolutely not, because Barad-dûr is in Mordor. Kharn-dûm is the capital of the Witch Realm. Witch Realm Hammerguard, however, are most certainly orcs, because you can see them through their open-faced helms. Witch Realm Pikemen as well, very good for the later stages of the battle, because of course they've got that heavy armour, tough to wear down, and we've seen the late stages of battles recently be decided by the amount of pikes that there are left, whether for the attackers or defenders. Scourge Raiders as well, for that range damage. They can be good for dealing with enemy phalanx units, and they're not bad in melee, but again, arrows are a bit of a problem even with that armour upgrade of theirs. Goblin Band, in a scenario the Goblin Band are not such a liability. In a main army battle, or a regular battle I should say, they're not really worth bringing at all, because they don't really offer anything more than something like the Orc Fodder, and yet you have to pay like 400 florins for them, which is a low amount of money for a single unit, but considering you get the Orc Fodder for like 50, the value proposition isn't really there. But of course that's not the case in this scenario, because you get assigned your armies, plenty of Angmar Halberds, which will be good as long as they can get into melee with the Arthedain footmen. But they probably won't, considering the fact that Arthedain have got plenty of arrows that they can bring to bear. 2 units of Snaga, very cheap and very, very disposable. Orc Fellas as well, for the same reasons as the Halberds they could be good, but for the same reasons as the Halberds they could also be quite weak. Moving on to the second Angmar army, we have Mevin, who has got some units hidden in the snow here, some Goblin Band. He's also got some Angmar Marauders, so some cheap line infantry. They'll struggle against most of what Arthedain has, but of course they're just going to be here for the numbers primarily. Gundabad Guard will be a little bit more like it, much more robust, which is the case for a lot of Angmar's units, to be fair. Could be a few barrow weights interspersed throughout the ranks of these armies as well. Orc fellas pushing up the siege towers, more goblin band hidden in the snow. We've got some trolls here, some archers, some goblin trackers, the trolls of Angmar, which are on scourge raiders for those throwing projectiles once again. At the back, again digging themselves into the snow a little bit, the Snaga stalkers, which are on blackguard, which are a really strong unit. They'll be able to outperform most of what Arthedain has on foot, but there are only so many of them. Guardians of Kharndoom here, one of the mainstays of the Angmar roster. Very heavy armour, very thick shields, especially when you've got that armour upgrade. They're very tough to wear down. Not necessarily the most damaging unit of line infantry, but they don't need to be considering what Angmar are all about. Being aggressive and then grinding your opponents into the dust. Then we have Mr. Sneakman, who's got some goblin band pushing up these ladders, or carrying up these ladders I should say. Several units of them, including a unit of orc fellas as well, so orc fellas going to be a large portion of the first wave onto the settlement by the looks of things, so they could clear a space for the rest of the units to follow. Guardians of Kharndoom, which are on blackguard. Scourge raiders again forming up the bulk of that part of the army. Warg riders will probably be sent across to assist Eclipse in zoning out that Dunedain cav. Trolls of Angmar are over here as well. Goblin trackers, Angmar marauders and halberds. Yeah, fairly well balanced army. There's plenty of standard Angmar units. And the final Angmar army today going to be commanded by Windy, and he has got some goblin band and some Snaga stalkers, the fodder in the front. We've got some more Snaga stalkers, and over here some Angmar marauders, which is quite interesting. Some cavalry over here, some warg riders and skirmishers, but there is a bit of cavalry from the main garrison of FORNOST, which is going to be sallying out as well, so these will probably be used to try and counteract that. Another unit of trolls of Angmar. We have got some Scourge Raiders, 2 units of them. We've got some Witchram Hammer Guard, who will be really good, honestly, against most of what Arthedain have. It's only really the Dunedain that their armor piercing won't be really efficient against, but most of the central units that Arthedain are going to be using will really struggle against a unit like the Hammer Guard. Angmar and Marauders, got some Angmar Halberds over here as well, has some Witch Realm Pikemen. So, we'll handle the garrison first, because we're likely to see more of them than the Dunedain that are hidden in the hills. Froggy is one of the defenders. He's got some Royal Court of House Armlaith and some Dunedain at Mounted Company, some Dunedain who stayed behind as part of the garrison. Some melee cavalry, some standard melee cavalry, and some multiple HP lancers. If they micro themselves correctly, they should be able to deal with those wargs, but Angmar of course could make life quite difficult for them by moving up with more than just their wargs and taking a slower approach. Evendim Spearmen, who have got the armour upgrades. Again, a little bit misleading as a unit, as I said several times already. Evendim archers, who have got single armour upgrade as well. Wearing shorts or a kilt in this weather is probably not advisable, but there they are, going to be doing some damage on the approach. I would imagine the garrison, considering that the Angmar armies are not uber elite and it's a 4v4, I'd imagine the kind of units we're going to see in this settlement are going to be mostly just your rank and file, and Evendim spearmen certainly fit that mould, and so do the Evendim archers. More spears up on the walls, more spears over here. And guarding the front gate, we do have some dismounted FORNOST ERAIN knights, so defending their home, quite literally, backed up by some Evendim spearmen. Interesting to see there isn't a huge amount of pikes in here. There are some Illuminas gate guards and some standard Evendim archers and spears, but they're not going to be able to blanket the choke points with pikes and just sort of hold out indefinitely, which I do quite like. I think that'll add quite a lot to this battle, because the Evendim spearmen can hold decently well. Darkwool 44 also defending down here in the bailey. A couple of units of Evendim archers, which will probably be moved up onto the wall fairly quickly. Back over here, got some more dismounted FORNOST ERAIN knights, some more Dunedain as well, some peacekeepers this time, who'll be really good at dealing with the entry-level Angmar units. Some Dunedain scouts who could be sallied out of the walls as well. Probably recommended actually, because you can definitely find some gaps in Angmar. They don't have the ability to counter skirmish horse archers quite as much as quite a lot of other factions. Dunedain peacekeepers and Evendim archers, and then finally at the back, in the keep of the fortress, we have got some more Illuminas gate guards and dismounted FORNOST ERAIN knights, which seem to be the most elite units we've seen so far. Some more peacekeepers. There are some dismounted knights of Illuminas in here, as well as some troll slayers, wardens of the north. Yeah, this is where quite a lot of strong units are, to be honest. Wardens of the north, catapult as well, Dunedain troll slayers. They have all the tools they need to hold out here. More Court of House Armlaith and more some Grey Company as well. So actually more elite than I was thinking that the garrison force would be afforded here, to be honest with you. We shall see how that develops. But like I said, 2 armies here would definitely not be enough to withstand the onslaught the reinforcements are going to be coming from the hills. A lot of cavalry as well for the defenders, to be fair. If they don't use their cavalry well, they could find themselves, they could find this battle spiralling out of their control pretty quickly. Lango has got some more mounted company. Melee cavalry, not necessarily the most useful thing here, because against the wargs they will still take losses, and they're not going to be the best at charging into the Angmar lines either. But still they are here, acting as protection perhaps more so for the horse archers in the Dunedain scouts. It's going to be the units that are capable of hiding in these trees as well. More Dunedain scouts here, as well as more mounted company, plenty of mounted company. The encampments in the hills, we have got some Dunedain peacekeepers, a very, very strong unit, as we've already seen several examples of in the town. A couple more units up here. Quite a spread out force this, so it's going to take a while actually for them to organise themselves. Some more Wardens of the North, 2 units of them. 2 units of peacekeepers. And over here more peacekeepers. Never again will you see such a heavy amount of peacekeepers, I don't think. And then down over here we have Morris, who's playing as the final army. He has got some Wardens of the North, Dunedain peacekeepers, all in a big old blob. Again, I would actually expect Arthedain to win this fight based on the quality they have at their disposal, and it's not as if the Angmar armies are completely overwhelming in the quality that they have at their disposal. So I would expect an Arthedain victory here. I expect that of the defenders, and I would consider it a failure if they do not deliver. So we shall see. Maybe that's a little bit harsh, but they've got a lot of Dunedain at their disposal. If you can get these reinforcements over quickly enough, there's no reason why they shouldn't wipe Angmar away, in my opinion. But without further ado, let's begin. The first phase of this battle is going to take place between the 2 mounted units. The two contingents of mounted units between the 2 factions, but of course Arthedain have got a significantly higher amount of mounted units throughout their armies than Angmar do, which gives Angmar the incentive to be hyper-aggressive, I would say, and try and get inside the settlement with as much of their army as they possibly can, as quickly as they can. So it'll be interesting to see if that is indeed what they try to do, because the longer they stay out here in the open field, the more likely they're going to be picked apart by the Dunedain scouts, which will inevitably be heading their way as well. Also, any sort of cavalry that may be coming from the front. Royal Court of House Armlaith, of course, which are in the settlement. No mounted Knights of Illuminus, it's worth saying, but also to that end there are no Witch Realm Inquisitors either, so neither side has got their most devastating unit of cavalry, but Arthedain have certainly got the numbers. Dunedain Mounted Company engaging with the Warg Riders. Relatively even fight that. But the Royal Court of House Armlaith trying to go after more juicy targets like the ranged wargs, but they actually do get clipped in the end by the Warg Riders, so Froggy trying to flank around with his cavalry, but in the end he is going to be contained by the wargs, and that will allow Windy's army to continue to march forward. It's going to be a problem. He's going to be able to get his Royal Court of House Armlaith out of there because they are very solid, as with both of the really high tier Arthedain cavalry. They've got a lot of armour and a lot of shield value as well, which will help them even if they don't have an anti-cavalry bonus per se. Meanwhile, Dunedain Mounted Company charging in, doing a little bit of damage to the Goblin Band, but the Goblin Band, of course, are one of those units. Low-end spears, Windy won't mind at all, but that's how the Dunedain Mounted Company have decided to be used. Hounding the Royal Court of House Armlaith as well. Froggy really struggling a little bit to utilise the cavalry how he would like. If they were going to use all of their cavalry from in the settlement all at once, Angmar could have been in a bit of trouble, but considering only 2 units were outside the walls, their fate was rather obvious, to be honest with you. Angmar Marauders shutting off any sort of escape they had against the Warg Riders pursuing them. And that's going to be the end of the sally forth from those 2 units of cavalry. They have plenty more where that came from though. They will need to hope that the Dunedain cavalry battalions in the hills are utilised very efficiently if they are to get victory in this fight. The arrow towers now activated as well, firing into the Angmarim as they approach the walls. One of the goblins there catching an arrow. Evendim archers getting up on the walls. I mean, if they're going to get their Evendim archers up on the walls, they will need to start firing away with them relatively quickly because the siege towers are on their way. And you really don't want the Evendim archers in melee with many of the Angmar forces, to be honest. Orc fellas in particular, the armour upgrade will not serve the Evendim archers how they may want it to. Evendim spearmen as well. Here come the Evendim archers firing away with some of their ammunition now. Stuff like the Orc fellas are definitely what you want to be going after with Evendim archers. Very, very vulnerable, and also decent in melee against quite a lot of the entry level troops. that you are utilising if you're Arthedain. And there are plenty of them pushing up these siege towers as well. And they will be able to get to the walls here. Not quick enough on the uptake there, I don't think, with their archers. There was a good opportunity there to do a lot more damage to the orc fellas than they will probably be ultimately doing. Fortunately, however, the pathfinding of siege equipment in Medieval 2 being as slow as ever, frame rates also taking a little bit of a chunk out, so still waiting for the Arthedain forces over there, so they can't move immediately. There is a timer on when they can start to move. Evendom Spearmen getting into shield wall formation. Frame rates being what they are, I'm kind of glad that there is no siege equipment for Angmar so they can knock walls down, because that's always when the frame rate suffers the most. Ram. Firing away. Evendom archers, I think they've already been moved off the wall, so yeah, a little bit of a missed opportunity there, I would say. And orc fellas being the first ones up onto the wall when they're not taking a ton of arrow fire is the right move, I would say, because while they will die en masse, they will also clear out a bit of a space and do a bit of damage. So I think that is probably the right call when all is said and done. Goblin Band. They will need to get some slightly bulkier units on the front line fairly quickly, however, to consolidate, and a lot of their units are still fairly far back, so we shall see. Here you can see dismounted FORNOST ERAIN Knights. That's a different matter entirely. With a unit of heavy swordsmen, the orc fellas won't make much of an impression. While the armour piercing is still useful, they simply do not have the ability to withstand the damage that the FORNOST Knights are dishing out. Evendom Spearmen, it will be a little bit more of a close run thing, as the orcs take their first steps within the city limits of FORNOST. Not entirely sure what's going on with the frame rate in certain places here. More fellas moving up there. Again, Evendom archers. What is going on here? This is not an issue that I've had to deal with for a long time. Is this one of those settlements that's got a bunch of hidden stuff which is causing the frames to go through the floor? I hope not. But this is the sort of thing which hopefully will resolve itself as the battle goes along. Orc fellas once again engaging with Evendom Spearmen. Another wave of units coming forward. Again, it's more orc fellas. I'd like to see some slightly bulkier units getting ready to move forward as well. The Angmar armies have got every incentive, after all, to push forward aggressively into the settlement as quickly as they possibly can. Arrows being sent over the walls, trying to tag the odd unit, get the odd kill, soften them up as much as possible for the trademark Angmar offensive. No Barrow-wights, interestingly enough, so they can't use them as a crutch, which is quite interesting. Meanwhile, these orc fellas getting absolutely massacred, as you would expect, by the Arthedain heavy swordsmen. And even over here as well, yeah, you can see the arrow towers probably doing quite a lot of damage to the orc fellas as well. What will Angmar do here? Yeah, they're getting heavily surrounded. The Evendom Spearmen just pinning them in place. Also, the orc fellas don't do a very good job at keeping themselves alive, so even an entry-level spear unit like the Evendom will be able to do decent damage to them in return. Snaga. There are many Snaga, of course, but they're going to do less damage to the upgraded Evendom. And those Evendom archers continuing to get into position, firing over the battlements. Medieval 2 doing its thing there, where even though you should be able to shoot through the gaps, you can't. It's really the biggest error, I think, with Medieval 2 as a whole, is the fact that skirmish units have to shoot over stuff like this. It's an old game, of course, so you can forgive them that for such a mechanically tight experience for the most part, but still. Snaga once again proving to be the first units in. Evendom Spearmen will be able to hold them off fairly indefinitely without any sort of support. Orc fellas doing their best. I mean, they will score kills, but they will need another wave of attack coming forward pretty quickly. Meanwhile, down here, also moving in through the gate, Evendom Spearmen closing up. Support from the Evendom archers up on the walls as well, but a combination of Scourge Raiders, interestingly enough, being committed very quickly with Angmar Marauders. The Trolls as well. There are actually some... Well, I mean, yeah, basic spears and pikes are not going to be great against the Trolls, so I actually think this is probably a good time to commit one of your units of Trolls if you're Angmar, because it will get the ball rolling, and if you're prepared to commit infantry in behind them as well, it will give you the entryway into the settlement you probably need. Dismounted FORNOST ERAIN Knights probably the best counter to trolls that Arthedain have down here in the lower Bailey. They do have some troll slayers in the town centre, of course. Dunedain scouts will do a bit of damage, but not so much to the trolls, more so to the Angmar marauders that are with them. Orc fellas continuing to struggle against the fighting men of Arthedain up on these walls. The dismounted FORNOST ERAIN Knights giving that little bit of quality to the Arthedain defence, which is working wonders for them. Snaga are actually clearing out a bit of a space for themselves up on the wall here against the Avendum Spearmen, but that will be very short-lived as the Dunedain Peacekeepers come in here to bring about an end to that nonsense. And over here, Mr. Sneakman putting his ladders on the walls, but I mean, there are Avendum archers there, ripe for the taking, even if you just get Goblin Band into them. Pretty decent way to engage Orc fellas. Dunedain Peacekeepers will do really well against units with low defense like Orc fellas, that really high base damage that you have with a one-handed axeman. And a lot of the entry-level Angmar units that are going to be committed forward first here are the bread and butter for the Dunedain Peacekeepers, exactly the kind of units you want to see them facing off against. Ladders, Eclipse 2500 of Darkcloud. I wonder if this will go unnoticed. Witchround Blackguard being committed to the walls, and they will butcher their way through Avendum archers and spearmen. And if they continue to send units up onto the walls, this could be the sort of thing which goes unnoticed for long enough that it ends up doing a lot of damage. I mean, what's going on over here? Oof, this is one of those. Frame rate of this battle is not particularly fantastic. Angmar marauders following the Snaga up. Actually, no, this was Orc fellas, wasn't it? Goblin Band there as well, so Angmar definitely not shy about committing numbers to the walls and to their assaults, which is good to see. Not only from a spectacle perspective, but this is the way that you have to try and get in there. Windy committing forward his Hammer Guard as well, which will do horrendous damage to Avendum Spearmen very, very quickly. So I like this from Angmar. They're not content to just commit forward their low tier units and bounce off the defence here of FORNOST. They are going to commit forward their elites. And that is going to put more and more pressure on Arthedain. Like I said, Arthedain will ultimately end up losing this fight without the reinforcements from the hills anyway. It's just how efficient Angmar can make this. How much damage as well Arthedain can do before their Dunedain reinforcements in the hill encampments arrive is going to be fairly key, I think. Lots of arrows coming in, but with the Blackwatch Legion on the front line bulldozing their way through the Arthedain front line, they're not going to be able to withstand this. Even an extra unit of spears is not going to be enough to turn back this particular tide, and Angmar threatening here to overrun the first line of defence, and I think they can see that. Arthedain already beginning to pull back some of their units, content to try and allow the defenders that are out here the opportunity to try and kill as much as they can, which over here on this portion of the defence they will be able to be fair. Snaga and Goblins really not the answer for highly trained, battle-ready Dunedain. Oh, and that ladder has been abandoned. Angmar Marauders up on the walls, and to be fair, Angmar Marauders, they won't be dominant in too many fights, but they'll do pretty well actually against a unit like the Avendum Archers, to give them their credit. Another siege tower being pushed up by just some Goblin Band, but this is what I'm talking about. As many entryways into the settlement as you can is always the way to go as the attackers. Try and pressurise as many angles as you can, and eventually the defenders, you will find gaps and you will start to gain some ground. And even if they have noticed the Witchround Blackguard and Hammer Guard that are now arriving on the walls, they can't really do much about it because their defence is being overrun. Poor Avendum Archers being tasked with dealing with one of the strongest units of bodyguard line infantry that there is. What is this man doing? He is hovering. He has learnt how to levitate. There's Angmar halberds waiting. More Snaga pouring onto the walls. The walls are pretty much lost at this point. There's still a few Arthedain units, but most of them are fighting to the death at this point. Trolls pushing forward with the Blackwatch Legion, trying to make sure that none of these Arthedain defenders can escape. Avendum Archers being hounded by more Blackguard. The Trolls, of course, with their movement speed, will be able to pick away at these Avendum Archers. I'd be surprised if they didn't rout, but of course there is a town centre, so any routing units could escape, but many of those units will be subject to the bug, of course, which makes them perpetually rout. Now, these Dunedain forces over here in the hills still haven't seen the signal fire, I suppose. as FORNOST continues to burn. Blackwatch Legion in here, more Guardians of Khan Doom. Maybe I was being a little bit too generous to Arthedain early on. I was only really paying attention to the quality after all. But then I did also think that the forces in the hills would be committed sooner, in which case I think Angmar would have been in genuine trouble. But as it is, clearly Eclipsed. I shouldn't have doubted him. He knows how to construct a scenario with decent rules. Meanwhile, Angmar Marauders, again the sort of unit which Dunedain Peacekeepers will do excellently against, but at this point it's just a matter of engaging on as many fronts as possible for Angmar and just overwhelming their foes. Evandem Spearmen are there. Angmar Marauders, victory seems certain. Again, just going up against Evandem Archers though. The armour upgrade is primarily useful in a ranged encounter for the Evandem after all. Not really designed for a melee encounter like this, even against basic units. Time to get these Evandem Spearmen out of there. It's time to try and salvage as much as you possibly can to hold out. Because I assume Angmar are not beholden to try and stop the sally forth. I mean, a lot of this is cavalry, to be fair. Angmar getting a lot of their forces inside the walls. They will have to try and get inside the walls as quickly as possible now, because the longer they stay outside of it, that's where this cavalry will be at its most useful. Inside the walls, however, all of this cavalry will be significantly less useful if you can get your spears to cover the rear. Interesting to see if that will in fact be the case. There is a small cavalry force left, of course, for Angmar, which can act as a bit of a rear guard and give them all the time they need to get all of their units inside the fortress. Windy has still got his Warg contingent as well. Just a sneak man with a unit of Warg Riders. They will be overrun in the cavalry stakes here, Angmar, but it will buy them enough time to get all of their units inside the settlement. You can see how quickly they are now pouring in. Angmar Halberds could be used as a rear guard in choke points as well to really take the sting out of that cavalry, or at least force them to use the ranged cavalry on a unit, which is not all that important in the grand scheme of things. Warg Skirmishers going to be throwing their javelins in. Doing some good damage here to the Dunedain Mounted Company, which will perhaps convince Arthedain to start moving forward with a little bit more urgency. What are they going after there? Just the standard Warg Riders? A ton of arrows coming in there. I mean, they'll shred through them pretty quickly here, but again, this is more arrows they won't have to deal with later on, Angmar, so they won't be enjoying the fact that their wargs are getting so easily slaughtered, but gotta look for the silver lining. Skirmishers. More arrows spilling forth. Dunedain Scouts doing their thing. Not a lot of rangers, I noticed. There were the Grey Company inside the city limits. Undoubtedly that will be a bit of a problem for the attackers as they try to push their way through the choke points to the main keep. Again, a few wargs routing off. Dunedain Mounted Company coming in to deal with them. Warg Skirmishers trying to do their thing. There's still actually infantry on the outskirts of the settlement here. Oof, this frame rate though. Wonder why that is. Haven't had that issue on any maps recently, but no matter. Goblin Band. Here, I guess they were hidden actually, so now they're going to sort of try and spring a bit of an ambush. Goblin Band pushing up the walls. Having a look from on high. In a chaotic engagement such as this, Warg Skirmishers getting overrun by Dunedain Scouts and Mounted Company. Continuing to push forward Grey Company as well, which is a real problem. The body piercing that they offer. Trying to hunt them down with the Wargs, but I mean they're going to take losses on the approach. Yeah, I mean it was definitely the right idea to attempt, but Arthedain were always going to be able to counteract that. I can only apologise for the frame rate. Sometimes maps have got this unwanted feature to them, and there's nothing unfortunately I'm going to be able to do about that. Dunedain Peacekeepers continuing to try and hold on to the walls. They will eventually be overrun, but they will take their fair share of Angmar Marauders with them before they inevitably fall by the wayside. Then back over here, Arthedain get ready to bank up on this gate as well. They do have stronger units back here that they can use to defend the primary keep. Dunedain Troll Slayers already up on the walls. Axes drawn. I doubt they've used their javelins because there isn't a pile of corpses in front of the gatehouse. But there may very well be if they linger for too long as these arrow towers continue to do their grisly work. Right, let's see what the cavalry force outside the gate is doing, even though this seems to be where the frame rate is at its weakest. Oof. Makes the camera work a lot more difficult as well when you're dealing with a frame rate like this. Goblin band trying to leave the area as the Dunedain Mounted Company continue to charge into them. There may be spears, but they're going to be vulnerable to this sort of thing. I'd be cautious about using too much ammunition on a unit like the Goblin Band, to be honest. I'd be much more willing to utilise them on stuff like, yeah, like Angmar Marauders, Gundabad Guard trying to give them a bit of cover, but if you're talking about Grey Company doing the damage, which we are, that isn't going to matter one bit. Any Gundabad Guard kills you get are just going to be a bonus, as the arrows rip through multiple units. Plenty of cavalry still out here. I don't know how useful they're going to be later on. Warg skirmishers still back here. They will... only 9... yeah, well, they do rout in the end. Only 9 of them remain. Yeah, the Dunedain Mounted Company chasing them off. With the cavalry rebalance, you can see the Dunedain Mounted Company become a very significant feature in Arthedain, because as a sort of single HP mounted melee unit, melee cavalry, they have the potential to be really good as long as the monopoly of multiple HP cavalry in terms of effectiveness is broken in the game. Time will tell whether that is the case. Windy pushing into the town with his orc fellas. They really need the infantry to arrive, and they are on the way, of course, but it will take a little while for them to arrive. But Angmar do need to be aware of that. They can't just unthinkingly move forward now. There was an incentive for them to be hyper-aggressive to get into the lower part of the fortress, but now that they are here, they do need to consider the fact that there is reinforcements on the way. And there is only one gate in. You can scale several walls as well, but Warns of the North using their body-piercing arrows. Interesting to see what they're going after. Trolls? Not sure I'd go after trolls. I think the Hammer Guard would be my first port of call for my armour-piercing arrows. The Black Guard is strong as well, but the Hammer Guard represent a much more dangerous proposition in terms of damage, whereas the Black Guard you could use up close. You're going to take less damage as you get your stuff like your javelins into position. They've got their front lines set up quite nicely here. Steel bows, the legacy of the steel bow still alive and well as they continue to do damage in here. And they are going after that unit of Blackguard now. A lot of these projectiles are probably hitting Goblin Band and the like. I guess at least they're killing something. Meanwhile, back here the cavalry probing. Dunedain scouts doing their best to sort of soften the enemy up before the infantry reinforcements arrive. The gate to the keep has now been breached. There's also that body piercing, of course, which is trying to do its grisly work to the Gundabad Guard. And Angmar, they just kind of have to sit here and take this punishment. They've got plenty of these entry-level units which they can use as chaff, but they need to hope they have enough left to stop the infantry reinforcements when they arrive. Because I believe what they're going to do is put more of their force into progressing further through the settlement and trying to go after the town centre. Be quite a turnaround actually, because if they get surrounded they could end up defending the lower bailey from Arthedain as they counter-attack into them. We shall have to wait and see. The trolls once again in the vanguard, and a ton of lower tier units pushing forward as well to join them. They're using the ram as well as kind of an old tactic in Medieval 2 where you can sort of push siege equipment forward and disrupt lines like this. And it kind of works. It's not terribly effective, but it's something you can do, and it's better than sort of just throwing your infantry in there. It does help. The effectiveness of it is limited, but still. Evendim spears and dismounted FORNOST ERAIN knights. I mean, in particular, they're going to be trying to disrupt the formation of the Annuminous Gate Guards here. Cavalry trying their best. Units now scaling the ladders. Angmar Marauders, who are going to be introduced to the business end of the two-handed swords of these knights. Very, very tough for them. And still pushing in. They've got a good position up here for their archers and their javelins. Firing in with their archers for the time being. Again, mostly low-tier units and trolls, so that makes sense. As soon as some high-tier infantry comes forward, which to be fair, there are Blackguard in there, so if they notice those, Darkwolf 44 would be very well served actually using any javelins he has to do some damage to them. You could scale this wall as well. You could get a ladder up here perhaps. Time will tell whether Angmar decide they want to do that or not. They've got 2 ladders set up already, but Peacekeepers and FORNOST Knights waiting for them. They might need a little bit more reinforcements up on the walls, however, Arthedain. Angmar are definitely looking to try and overwhelm these defences. They know that quality-wise they'll struggle a bit, but numbers-wise they do have the edge. The infantry is now starting to arrive out here, though, by the looks of things, so time is of the essence. They have a little bit longer before they have to deal with an attack coming from the rear, in terms of infantry. And their own siege equipment can be used against them. What a twist. Plenty of units waiting for them. You can see as soon as they come in through the gate, they want to utilise their archers and their throwing axes. So definitely the right idea here from Angmar. You can see, however, a huge amount of chaff in the way. So it's going to be an elongated process here, I think, for the Arthedain reinforcements to try and do their thing. Meanwhile, trolls up on the walls, assisting the Angmar marauders. What are they going to do up here? Grey Company? They could do with something pretty substantial firing up there. I mean, Warns of the North wouldn't be the worst idea. You kind of need to stop this rot at the source. Ooh. That's risky because you could hit your own men, but doing a ton of damage there to the Witch Realm Pikemen with their artillery. Artillery can be so brutal in a choke point such as this. Grey Company also firing up onto the walls as the Blackguard actually did manage to push up, and they are going to be able to engage with the Troll Slayers, but the Troll Slayers looks like they're firing point blank into them, which is going to be really devastating. And even if they weren't, in melee they'll be able to hold their own with those two-handed axes of theirs. Evendim archers firing in as Angmar continue to try and push their way forwards. And there you can see Evendim archers firing up onto the walls as well as the trolls continue to infest the walls, to be honest with you. Peacekeepers have got good base damage for dealing with trolls, but they don't have the armour piercing that would really make them an anti-troll unit, for me. Meanwhile, yeah, it looks like Arthedain, seeing the danger of going through that gate, they're going to go around and maybe try and use these siege towers. They can't afford to take too long about this though, Arthedain. As much as going over here and using these is a less painful approach, they need to get inside the settlement sooner rather than later, because they do run the risk of their defensive brethren within being completely overrun, which will happen eventually, of course. As much damage as they can do to Angmar, pressure needs to be put on the rear by the infantry outside the walls if they are to have success. Grey Company and javelins and archers will all do a lot of damage to Angmar. I still think Arthedain should win this as long as the reinforcements outside the walls start to put pressure on the chaff in the way sooner rather than later. Can't afford to be too picky in this sort of situation. Scourge Raiders up on the walls with the trolls. What's going on over here? Evendim archers. Do they have anything they can actually shoot from this angle? Don't think so. Warns of the North firing in, presumably going after the trolls. There's a lot of dead trolls up on the walls now, and their catapult is also being engaged now by a unit of trolls which has been used aggressively. I don't know how long these trolls are going to last per se. A ton of throwing axes being utilised there. Going after Evendim archers, perhaps seeing that they just need to use their ammunition at this point, do a bit of damage, otherwise they're just going to get shot up. Dismounted Knights of Anubis and Royal Court of House Armlaith stopping the advance of the trolls, but Angmar just again using their muscle, which again is a sign that the reinforcements are needed. FORNOST calls for aid, and the Dunedain are trying to answer, but they're taking their time about it, which is risky. They're doing damage to the Gundevad Guard with their javelins, they're softening them up, which is all well and good. But are they actually getting inside the fortress here? They have managed to leave a rear guard with some units which are of good quality as well. Witch Realm Blackguard, Guardians of Khan Doom, won't go down without a fight. With this amount of Dunedain, they should be able to pummel their way through. Peacekeepers. Again, like, you may see the Blackguard there, but you can't really afford to just say, ooh, I don't want to go in there, there's units. Time is of the essence. And this will be the decisive period of the fight, I think. They have managed to save their catapult, which is good news for Arthedain. It gives them that punishing tool which they can use to reverse the Angmar tide, which was taking place here in the keep. Meanwhile, those Scourge Raiders did a lot of damage to those Arthedain archers, but they have since been engaged by Wardens of the North and dismounted FORNOST ERAIN Knights. That artillery continuing to do its thing, but there are Blackwatch Legion in there. I don't want to get too close to this fight. This is the first fight in a while where I've been worried about getting too close to it and causing a crash. As the dismounted Knights of Anubis are also getting in there, as you can see. Very solid unit, but will they simply be forced out of the way? They're going to get into guard mode by the looks of things and use their throwing axes still, the Scourge Raiders. Certainly not the worst idea. Angmar still have units that they can commit forward. Maybe running out of steam a little bit. Scourge Raiders getting up onto the walls, engaging here with the Arthedain archers. What is going on back here then? Dunedain on the walls. A lot of Dunedain on the walls. There were chaff units in the way. Scourge Raiders, defeat seems certain. As you would expect, I mean, they've got a decent melee defense, a decent damage for what they are, but they're going up against a dedicated melee unit as good as the Peacekeepers. They still have ammunition as well, they will probably try and escape. It's going to be tough. The Blackguard and the Guardians of Khan Doom, however, will put up much more of a fight, but again, they're just here to buy time for the Angmar forces further within the settlement to make more progress. Depending on how you look at it, Angmar just getting to the town centre would be a bit of a victory for them, because it's a sign that the settlement has been ravaged and the reinforcements didn't really arrive on time to save its people, even if they have managed to win the battle overall. And there are Dunedain Rangers as well. Shooting right into that blob, which will really help against the Witch-Round Blackguard. Still Halberdiers back here. Goblin Trackers. Firing into the Peacekeepers from Lango. Being kept in place by some Scourge Raiders. Still the arrow towers, you can hear them pinging away. Ooh, and there go the catapults. I can only assume that the Scourge Raiders' throwing axes destroyed the catapults there. Nothing else would have been capable of doing that, so they've now lost their most devastating single-hit tool. And 3 Witch-Round Blackguards still live. Being supported by Blackwatch Legion, they have managed to defeat the Troll Slayers in the end, and now they're going to be moving on to this unit of Arthedain archers, which has probably racked up a pretty decent kill count for itself in this time. Scourge Raiders down here. Oof, man, this frame rate. It's really hard to use the camera when the game is chugging this hard. Snaga Stalkers, there are Witch-Round Blackguard in there as well. Again, they are living on the edge here, the defenders. The town centre lies before them. The Dunedain reinforcements are going to pose a real issue for Angmar. But if they can get to that TC and cap it, I don't think there's much the Dunedain are going to be able to do to stop that. That's probably the way they win this fight, because in terms of just outright kills, you would imagine with the quality of Dunedain out here, Arthedain would go on to win the fight overall, but if they can take that town centre and just get a bunch of chaff in the way, and that would signify really the settlement being sacked. There goes one of the Arthedain generals within the keep. Not going to be too much of a problem with the calibre of units that they still have at their disposal. Dunedain Peacekeepers carving their way through Goblin Band as you would expect. Troll Slayers are going to be doing the same to these Scourge Raiders. A lot of these Angmar units starting to wonder if perhaps routing would be the appropriate way to move forward with their lives. Gundabad Guard fighting on the front line. The solidity that they are offering is fairly key at this point, but elsewhere along the outer wall, the Dunedain are doing very well. The Blackguard, however, still alive. 37 of them, all bloodied up, especially after the attentions of those Rangers, but still proving themselves to be the stalwarts that everyone knows they are. Over here, meanwhile, some Rangers trying to finish off these Scourge Raiders. Probably have utilised their ammunition, I would certainly hope so anyway. And these Guardians of Khan Doom, we arrive just in time to see them rout as they get sandwiched between 2 units of Peacekeepers. So, do Angmar have what it takes to push their way through? If they had a unit of Blackwatch Legion left, this would probably be time to use them, but I don't think they do. I think the Blackwatch Legionnaires they have left are all very, very depleted, which is understandable considering how aggressive they've been up till this point. Just throwing everything they can in the way at this point, Arthedain. Evendim archers having to be heroes. All the civilians presumably are in the castle itself. Grey Company out here. Scourge Raiders who are now going to be claiming the wall because they are certainly superior to the Evendim archers in melee. Buying time as all the Arthedain armies within the settlement can hope to do at this point now. Troll Slayers. Yeah, they need to push in more aggressively here, Arthedain. I think they can see the writing on the wall for their fellows within the castle. It's an interesting structure to a battle, this. It'll probably be one of my favourite battles I've done recently, if not for the frame rate tanking so much. Dunedain Peacekeepers' victory seems certain. And Angmar, of course, really just hanging on by a thread at this point. These Gundabad Guard are winning, but that's because they're fighting depleted Peacekeepers. Dunedain Rangers getting into position. There are some more Peacekeepers. Peacekeepers, again, like I said, you'll never see this many Peacekeepers in a battle again, I don't think. They move forward, yeah, so Arthedain at this point they are starting to rip through what remains of the Angmar defence, so time is of the essence for Angmar now. Now is the time where they should be looking to push through the inner defences because the Dunedain are on the way. And you do have to hold on to the town centre for a little while after all. Goblin trackers firing. Holding the Angmar off, or the Arthedain off, the Dunedain. I'll get my words right eventually. I mean, you can see here's Blackwatch Legion. Very depleted amount. Yeah, they're going to try and circumvent the situation. And they do need at this point, I think, to cap the town centre, because it's now or never. The Dunedain are really tearing their way through the chaff that they left behind at this point. And if they leave it too long to cap the town centre, then they will do the same to what little remains of the Angmar in here. There goes a general. Considering the Warns of the North that are there, I would assume that's another Arthedain general. Killing the Angmar generals would probably be a good way to proceed at this point. Angmar here, these Gundabad Guard again just standing in the way. All they need to do is hold for a little longer. Players admitting defeat, I would assume that's in here. At least one of the defenders within those walls. Guardians of Khan Doom being sent back outside. They see what must be done. Got to hold on. Arrows being utilised. I mean, the Dunedain Peacekeepers are less heavily armoured than other units of this cost, but they're still shielded. But at this point it's just a matter of doing as much damage as possible, slowing down the damaging units of Arthedain as the reinforcements begin to arrive. Going to try and get some Goblin trackers within. And here we go. We should cap the town centre. What's going on here? Is this just a... what's it called? Cosmetic town centre? It's not actually functional, we just have the flags, but it's not actually a real TC. That'd be disappointing, because I think that would have been a way mechanically for Angmar to win the fight. And I suppose, based on the timer, you'd have to say if this is how long the fight still lasts, they probably would have gone on to win this, to be honest with you. So I think we could probably say from here that Angmar's goal, at least their primary goal of sacking FORNOST, has been successful. Whether or not Arthedain can prevent total defeat and actually losing the settlement if their Dunedain reinforcements actually do get turned back by what remains of the Angmar, then their failure would be complete. Dunedain Mounted Company trying to bulldoze their way through, which is understandable against the Goblin trackers, because you stand to lose less if you try and push your way through with cavalry against a unit like that. But I think pretty much all of the Angmar units at this point further back in the settlement have been defeated. The Dunedain are coming through with force now. Troll Slayers back there. Yep, nothing left. Just having a cursory glance over the mini-map as well will confirm that. Angmar coming out, trying to slow the Dunedain horde down. All of those round shields. Pushing forward, it's going to be tough for them though. As Arthedain roll in. We've got further back. Scouts mounted company. I mean, cavalry in this sort of instance, like this is how the AI use it in Divide and Conquer when they just pile in. Cavalry can actually be used to mass push quite successfully, actually, as well. But obviously, in Reforged, considering the relative balancing, cavalry will be far less durable when anti-cavalry units are involved, and there are still Angmar Hellbirds here, of course. Some Guardians of Khan Doom there. Are they going to use the ladders? Yes, they are. Once again, Angmar's siege equipment being used against them as the Peacekeepers will surge over the walls. There are still some Hammer Guard over here, but only 13 of them. Still some Black Guard, 26 of them. The unit bloodied up, having already seen combat. To be fair, the Wardens of the North are the only multiple HP unit that the Dunedain have there, but they're still a fine unit indeed. And you can see the Peacekeepers scaling those ladders, as well as a large force going in through the gates. Cavalry also pushing their way through, engaging the Guardians of Khan Doom, trying to tear their way through the Angmarim as quickly as possible. Goblin trackers loosing what arrows they have left. To be fair, Angmar have abandoned the town centre, so the countdown would have stopped. But had the countdown actually been there, at least one unit would have stayed there to keep the town centre capped, so can't really use that as too much of an excuse. Scourge Raiders blocking the progress of these Peacekeepers, but they will ultimately be defeated. Still Troll Slayers back there as well, of course. That armour-piercing fight is going to be a little bit too much for what's left of the Angmarim to deal with. I think at this point it's fairly clear that the battle itself is going to be won by Arthedain, as I would have expected based on the compositions, but I think based on the fact that Angmar capped the TC, made it all the way there, the settlement has been sacked, and there probably isn't a great deal of civilians left alive. A grisly thought, but still. And over here, utilising their archers, but of course archery is not really Angmar's strong suit. They'll do a decent amount of damage with this many goblin trackers up on this wall, but it won't be enough, I think, to turn the tide of this battle. I could be wrong, but somehow I doubt it. Arrows coming over the wall as well. I think that might be ammunition from the Wardens of the North as well, so scything their way through those Scourge Raiders. Still some Warg Skirmishers left alive, but I doubt they have any Javelins left, otherwise they would probably be utilising them as we speak. Troll Slayers up on the walls now, joining the Peacekeepers, two very, very damaging, although very differently balanced Axemen. Scourge Raiders routing. Let's see here. Guardians of Khan Doom, defeat seems certain. They're pretty much the only thing. In fact, the Rams that have been pushed in the way are actually getting in the way of Arthedain pushing forwards now, from Angmar's perspective. In come the Wargs. A carpet of bodies has been formed. Of course, the other effect of a lower frame rate is it does actually make the battle's frames pass slower. What have we got here? Goblins. Goblin trackers that are routing, unsurprising given the fact that they're being engaged by Dunedain Troll Slayers. Still not being engaged up on this wall though. Well, I guess to be fair, the Guardians of Khan Doom are getting in the way. Quite for how much longer I'm not sure. They're a solid unit, but overwhelming odds is what they're facing now. And there goes a general. Captured, eh? Well, that isn't going to be happening, unfortunately. They're going to have one of the Angmarim leaders that they can throw in the dungeon of this settlement. Albeit a lot of rebuilding is going to be required. No actual damage done to the settlement outside of the gates, but its inhabitants, probably a lot of damage done to them. Oh, excuse me. Arthedain scouts. Those goblin trackers probably have racked up a nice kill count for themselves, to be honest, because they've been firing from on high for quite a while. There goes another Angmar general. Troll Slayers are in there, doing their thing. Troll Slayers still on the walls as well. Competitive fight this, and I do like the fact that it wasn't just a straight up battle, there was some nuance to it, with how the reinforcements had to be committed. And in the end, it kind of depends on how you want to look at it. If you're just looking at it from the classic army to army performance, then Arthedain are of course going to win. But I think that if you look at the objectives of the armies, it's a Pyrrhic victory for Arthedain at best, and also a Pyrrhic victory for Angmar. You could say that neither side really got what they wanted, but FORNOST does lie sacked, so Angmar can take that away with them. But at the very least, Arthedain was able to defeat the armies and not actually lose the settlement. No one's happy, but no one's overly sad either. Well, maybe some of these men will be when they realise that their families probably met their end at the end of one of the Witch Realm Hammer Guard. Not so great for them. Goblin trackers getting shot now by Troll Slayers. Being shot by something. I think this is going to be the last unit left alive, so I guess we'll just position ourselves here and go to ×2 speed to try and get through the frame rate hail. That was really the thing that let this battle down a little bit. I'm not entirely sure what it is. It's normally it can be down to too many assets being placed on the map, and I would assume that that's the case here. It is a bit of a shame. It wasn't unwatchable though. I've seen battles where it was something I had to abandon because it was so bad. This wasn't too bad. It's the kind of problem as well which does tend to actually get worse as the battle goes on. So in really long battles it can prove to actually be crippling. Not so this time though. Just about we're okay. This is about the limit of what's acceptable in terms of frame rates. And there go the Goblin trackers, and this is going to be the end of the fight now. So Arthedain, the Dunedain, return to FORNOST to find it sacked and dead orcs and men everywhere. Clear defeat. It's probably a little bit harsh on them, to be honest with you, but you can see very clear split between the two initial defenders and the two reinforcement armies that came in as clean-up duty. But we will of course be seeing the kills of the Angmar armies rather than the Arthedain ones, but I would imagine good performances from the infantry, but especially from the skirmishers of Arthedain when they were initially in the settlement. So let's see what did the damage. Hammer Guard doing well, as you would expect. Once they get into melee against Arthedain's rank and file, they're going to perform quite well, but they're also going to be the primary target of a lot of Arthedain's nastier skirmishers. Angmar Marauders getting 153 kills. I'd assume that would be against Evendom Archers. It's the only unit they'd be that dominant against. Scourge Raiders doing nicely as well, so they got into position and used their throwing axes to good effect. Guardians of Kharn breaking 100 kills, as did the Trolls. Trolls I thought were used quite well in this battle by Angmar, and they were used to good effect overall. Blackguard getting over 250 kills. Scourge Raiders again being used quite well. So Trolls and throwing projectiles, 313 kills. Yeah, the Trolls definitely used very, very nicely here by the Angmarim. And then finally, this player, Blackguard doing well, Pikemen doing decently in spite of the fact that I saw them getting pummeled by that catapult. Trolls of Angmar breaking 100 kills again. Blackwatch Legion with 347. That's a lot of kills for a unit which often does its best work without getting any kills, you know, just sort of pushing through lines and being that bulldozer. So very impressive, and the Hammer Guard as well. So yeah, I would say if I were going to give both sides, I think, got a Pyrrhic victory, but I do think Angmar deserve a bit of credit for how they approached this fight. And if the town centre was functional, let's not forget, Angmar would have been the actual victor in this battle, mechanically, according to Medieval 2. Though, of course, you could still infer that if the battle had continued, even if they captured the town centre, the Angmarim were right there, or the Arthedain forces were right there, and they would have simply taken the settlement back. So this would have been how it would have played out anyway, to be honest with you. But I leave it up to you to decide who you think was the bigger winner in this fight, because I think you could make a solid case for both. So yeah, big thank you to Eclipse for sending me this battle replay in a scenario. He's obviously back to work now, so they won't be coming thick and fast from him with quite the same volume as they have been for the past couple of weeks, but he'll be back at some point, I'm sure, to give us some more scenario goodness. And yeah, big thank you to sending this one to me, and a big thank you to all of the players that were part of this battle replay as well. I think when this one comes out, I'm not sure, like, I really don't want to make another channel update, another sort of live stream channel update, until I'm 100% sure on what's happening. I have a better idea of what's going to be happening now, though. I'm not going to share it for the time being, because I can't be sure. But I do think a timetable is sort of materialising now, and I have an idea about what's going to be going on. Irregardless of that, though, that's something which will be happening naturally over the course of time. The next battle that we're going to be seeing after this one, I don't know. There's still a few that I need to be working my way through, but I'm always on the lookout for more battle replays. So if you do want to send them to me, then do send them via Discord. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you will join me for whatever is next.